Hello, and welcome to our first ever virtual event at the Games Institute. I'm going to start off with a land acknowledgement, and then I will warm you up to get ready for this event. We would like to acknowledge that the land on which we live and work today is the land traditionally used by the Adelondran, Neutral, Anishinaabeg, and Haudenosaunee peoples. We recognize that the University of Waterloo is situated on the Haldimand Tract, which was the land promised to the Six Nations that includes 10 kilometers on each side of the Grand River. Even though some of us might not be physically at the University of Waterloo right now, we still say this land acknowledgement on behalf of the Grand River, but I invite you to think about the land that you are settled on right now. We also acknowledge the enduring presences and deep traditional knowledges, laws, and philosophies of the Indigenous peoples with whom we share our lands today. All right, so I am Marisa Benjamin. I am the Research Communications Officer. I can't see you, but hopefully you all can see me, and maybe we can dialogue together after. But my actual role is to introduce you to the person who's going to be moderating this event, who will subsequently introduce you to our speaker. Bree Weems is a lecturer at the University of Waterloo in Communication Arts and co-convener of the qCollaborative and doctoral candidate at York University. Her research explores and applies intersectional feminist philosophy and practice as forms of techne to ask about the potential of queer and feminist technologies for #activisms. So as I said, Bree is going to be taking it over to introduce our speaker and to moderate the event. She'll be running you through some housekeeping points, so please pay attention because that'll help you out later for our question and answer round. Take it away, Bree.
Bree, I think you're muted.
I'm totally muted. I sneezed before and was like, oh, let's mute that before you sneeze. Well, okay. Haha, got that out of the way. So now if anyone else says it, it won't be as embarrassing. You're welcome. All right, hi folks. Again, welcome to this chat on publishing in the humanities. We're really thrilled that you could join us today. Before we get going, like Marisa mentioned, there are a few housekeeping notes. First, we would just love if you introduced yourselves to us so that we know who's here and so that we don't feel like we're just talking to ourselves, which would also be okay, but we want to know who you are. So you can do that by popping into the Q&A function and saying hi. I think the Q&A should be on your right-hand top screen there. Second, as Shana is sharing with us, you can post questions in the Q&A that we'll be monitoring. Because we'll also have the intros in that same chat, it would be helpful if you could label your question with question in caps so that we don't accidentally miss it. So then after Shana's 20-minute talk, I'll pose your questions to her. And if we happen to misunderstand your question, and I've totally been known to do that, please feel free to send me a quick note in that chat and I will do my best to keep an eye on it there. All right, and last, while the talk doesn't have captions because we're here in real time, we will be circulating a document afterwards with some of the key points. Another quick thing is that if you've got follow-up questions or you're interested in joining us for more conversations, we would love to invite you to our Friday virtual meetups at 1 p.m. after following a data feminism webinar that you're also welcome to join. So if you've got any questions about that, let us know. All right, so let me offer a quick note about why we're actually doing this event. This talk emerged from a few of our feminist think tank discussions, and those are open to any and all GI members. And we were finding that a lot of us were really stressed about lost conference publications because of COVID-19, or feeling like we really couldn't crack the code for what journals were asking, or even what different terminologies meant. We were feeling really frustrated about trying to decipher really obscure reviewer feedback. And as we were talking, we realized more and more that publishing, like much of academia, requires a really specific knowledge that only comes from experiencing that process many times over, and then maybe finally succeeding. How to publish is not taught in classes. We don't talk about it much at meetings, but it seems like it's something that we're expected to know and be able to excel at. And so that insider knowledge is just another form of gatekeeping, we say. So as feminists, we're dedicated to breaking down those kinds of exclusionary boundaries and engaging in knowledge sharing. For us and for others, being a feminist means bringing marginalized knowledges, acts, and people from the margins over to the center And we hope that by sharing some of what we've learned and by discussing your concerns and questions, we can make the publishing process more accessible and work to diversify publishing. So now I will introduce Dr. Shana MacDonald, who will be sharing her knowledge with us today. So Dr. MacDonald is an associate professor and associate chair in communication arts at the University of Waterloo. Her SSHRC-funded interdisciplinary research is situated between film, media, and performance studies and examines intersectional feminism within social and digital media, popular culture, cinema, performance, and public art. Dr. MacDonald is a convener of the qCollaborative, the Q Lab, a feminist design lab dedicated to developing new forms of relationality through technologies of public performance. Through the lab, Shana co-runs the online archive, Feminists Do Media. The Instagram handle for that is @aesthetic.resistance, and we'll show you that a bit later, and feminist think tank gatherings at the GI. She's published in Feminist Media Histories and Media Theory Journal, and she and I have co-authored articles for a special issue of Leisure Sciences and a forthcoming article in Feminist Media Studies. So she knows a good deal about publishing. We're in good hands here today. So now I will pass it over to Shana.
Thanks so much. Thanks to Marisa and the GI for inviting me to have this talk with you today. Thanks to Bree for moderating. She's the absolute appropriate person to moderate this because we published together and we co-author a lot. So we've gone through this a lot, and I think she's going to offer a lot of insight and kind of push me on things that I might take for granted. So I look forward to our conversation. I'm really happy to do this today. I really wish I'd had this when I was a grad student. So I'm super happy to be sharing my experiences with you today. So what I'm going to do is in the first 20 minutes, I'm going to give some really basic foundations. We're going to talk about what we mean by the humanities, what humanities research looks like. I'm going to kind of talk to you through the process of generating publications and then what it looks like at the ground level of submitting, getting review reports, etc. So that'll be the first 20 minutes. In the Q&A, I can take up things that I haven't gotten to that I might have missed based on your questions, but also Bree and I can get to some of those more meta level discussions about ethics in scholarship, what we want the future of publishing to look like. We can kind of go there if we have time. So two things I want to note that are really important is one, everybody's publishing journey is different. And so you're taking right now my insights from my experiences, and it's like, just use it as a set of guideposts to sort of guide you along the way, but know that it might be very different for each one of us. So I'm just going to give you my perspective on this, and it might differ greatly from people in the humanities that are situated in other disciplines. The other thing that I want to say is that I'm working from an intersectional feminist point of view. And so that means that I'm going to discuss things as they traditionally exist right now, but I'm also really critical of them. And so hopefully in that Q&A, we can talk about why a lot of this is quite flawed. I don't like it. I've played the game, but I also really want to see for your generation and for the scholars coming up in the next 10 years for something to look really different by the time you get where I'm sitting. Okay, so I'm going to throw up a PowerPoint just so that there's something to look at while I'm talking. All right. So here in the front, what you see right now, it has my Twitter handle. If you ever want to talk to me on Twitter, that's where you can find me. If you need to send me an email, it's there as well. And again, you can follow us at aesthetic.resistance for our Instagram feed, which shows the Feminist Do Media account. All right. So what are the humanities? One way that we define the humanities, or all things, is to talk about what they are not. So humanities are, in their approach to research, quite distinct from the social sciences and the sciences. At the same time, they offer a vast set of scholarship under one umbrella. So we can talk within the humanities about a variety of disciplines. Those disciplines might also engage in social science or science research, more likely social science. So at that point, it's really just a different way in which we take up frameworks, and sometimes we use a combination of both humanities and social science. But humanities research includes philosophy, literature, fine arts, art history, communication to a certain degree, law, theology, etc. Now, I think what I want to say is that while we're going to talk a lot about like this kind of, I think it's a false divide, but it is a divide between the humanities and the social sciences. And I want to say that both approaches are actually very valuable and valid. I would have argued differently before, but I've been currently working a lot more in social science journals, and I really appreciate certain aspects of the parameters that are required of social sciences. But I will say that they are fundamentally different from the humanities. So they're both valuable and valid, but they offer really different approaches to studying phenomenon, and they come out with really different results. And that's what I want to kind of unpack a little bit to start. So largely, the humanities are defined as the study of human cultures and expression. So what we study then is phenomena, texts, and objects. We do this in order to map histories, to analyze how whatever we're studying circulates, how it makes meaning, and then understand how that both impacts the world and what it's going to mean for the future. So it's in some ways very speculative. It's about kind of studying the phenomenon as they emerge and as they have circulated in the past, and making sort of gestures and suggestions towards how we might want to think about them going forward. So there's not, often there's not a lot of concreteness in that. It's very much an independently derived set of ideas that we're sharing into a larger scholarly discussion. So the humanities then are interpretive and analytic, and their ultimate goal is to extend existing dialogues. In simplest terms then, humanities scholars select something to study. So that's their focus. They determine the subject of their research. And again, often this becomes an object, a phenomenon, or a text. We gather theoretical frameworks to help interpret what we're going to study. And then we do close readings. We read and engage with the subject we're studying very explicitly and in a very hermeneutic way. We're doing analysis. So again, setting focus, coming up with a framework that shows you who has already discussed this and what theoretical concepts they're using to apply to their analysis, and then the analysis itself, or as I'm calling it, the close reading. So those are the basics of it. Again, the whole point of this is to further the dialogue on the subject, expanding it from where it has already existed in other people's analysis. So what does this look like? So I'm a film scholar by training. That's where I began, and I shifted over into kind of a more broad-based media studies. But say we were to examine a film. So film scholars will examine films, historical periods of cinema, filmmakers and their oeuvres, film styles, and they'll do this all from theoretical positions. So say we were going to do a humanities analysis of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Our object then would be something within that universe. We would set a question that we would focus, and then we would produce an analysis. So a couple of ways that we could do this is we could sort of say, there's so many ways we could do this even from within film studies. We could say, am I studying representation? Am I studying how over the course of, a couple of decades, the Marvel Cinematic Universe has tried to move away to a certain degree from representing to valuing or representing more explicitly non-white, non-cis male heroes. So if we think about like with Captain Marvel and Black Widow and Black Panther, that shift towards different kinds of representations we could take up as a study. And we would look at a variety of different films, and we would use a theoretical framework. And the theoretical framework we could apply there would be a feminist, critical race, or queer theory lens. And we would take what people have said before within those spaces, and we would apply it to our analysis of this subject. And what we would do then, once we've set up what the frame is and what the theoretical interpretations are that we're going to apply, we would then determine what we're close reading. So are we close reading the scripts? Are we looking in depth at representation of non-white, non-cis bodies within 3 of the films and do a comparative analysis? These would be the kind of things we would do within a humanities essay or publication. Perhaps instead, I would be doing a study of fan cultures that arise around the Marvel Cinematic Universe. We might look at the posters. If you've noticed, I've shown you 2 different posters. Why are they different? What do they signify? How did they come about? What kind of meaning does that produce? These are the kinds of questions I would be asking if I was studying, say, Marvel Studios fan and movie posters. You could also look at fan cultures, fan community dialogues on social media, fan fiction, Twitter dialogues, and the films that inspire them. If I'm doing that, I might be actually using a paratext or participatory culture theoretical framework in order to advance my argument. So again, subject, some kind of theoretical framework that allows me to advance my analysis, and then a close reading coupled with some kind of conclusion that advances or furthers a dialogue. So another way that we could talk about this, and I'm just going to use it from my own experience, is that say I wanted to do something based on the work of Marcel Duchamp. So this is The Fountain by Marcel Duchamp. So in this case, I would be exploring the historical context from within the work emerged. I would look at the rest of Duchamp's work. So what's his context within his art process? I would look at the object itself in detail and how it's been reproduced and circulated over time, what museums it's been in, how it gets taken up in memes, etc. Within this, I might want to add, might want to add to the existing discussion on Duchamp, which obviously there's much, by saying, well, how did his work inform feminist art in the 1960s New York avant-garde? So that would be me making the link and extending further the dialogue. So finding those places are what we call the gaps in knowledge within existing discussions of whatever subject we're studying, and then filling in those gaps with our own interpretive framework, pulling together existing theoretical stuff. So it's basically like weaving a dialogue. That's what the humanities is. It's like bringing yourself into and weaving up a part of an existing dialogue. Okay. Oh yeah, that was my picture of 1960s feminist art that I've written extensively about. So let's talk then a little bit about how we publish in the humanities. There is a little bit of some misconceptions about how you publish in the humanities, and I am going to again give you a perspective from someone who publishes in media journals, film journals, and feminist journals, which largely take on a kind of interpretive analytic framework that I'm talking about right now. So often people think that it's really easy to get published in the humanities, but that's not entirely the case. So the top tier journals within these fields often have acceptance rates of 20% or below. So there's really no guarantee that you are going to get published. It's really important to outline that the timeline for publishing the humanities is often between 1 and 3 years. And so you need to know that going in. So when you're imagining, say, your CV for when you want to go on the job market, or you have a postdoc, or maybe you're in your first tenure track job, always be thinking 2 years ahead, because that's when whatever you're doing right now is going to come out and see the light of day. So it's actually quite a slow process. I think this is very different in some ways, and it means that if you're writing in real time on things that matter in the present moment, you might want to think about more public-oriented scholarship for that stuff that's really pressing, timely stuff, and then do your peer-reviewed journal articles for things that have take a bit of a longer view, because it will almost feel outdated by the time it gets published, and so you need to keep that in mind. Okay. So the majority of academic journals in the humanities are peer-reviewed. They're double-blind, which means you do not know the reviewers and the reviewers do not know who you are. So it's all anonymous. There are up to 2 to 3 reviewers per article that you submit, plus the editor, the leading editor for the journal, will be giving you guidance as well. So typically the 2 to 3 reviewers give reviewer reports, and a third one is often brought in if there's a division between the first 2 reviewers, if they see things completely differently. If there's like an accept and a reject, they'll bring in a third to kind of be the tiebreaker. But sometimes the editor will also be that person and make the executive decision. The format for articles in the humanities are between 6,000 and 10,000 words, or 20 to 30 pages. So basically like a chapter in a dissertation, and they will take on a variety of different styles. There's no standard style. Every journal is different, so you have to get to know intimately. MLA, Chicago Manual of Style, and Harvard. Those are the top 3 that we see being required of us. Impact factors are not measured in the same way in the humanities. It's really different. But what is valued and measured highly is solo authored publications in top tier journals. And so that's its own sort of quagmire, I would say, to get through it. So we don't use impact factors, but we do value very particular things. Okay. One of the things that is really valued within this is that you are expanding the scholarly discussion of a subject in substantial and original ways, in the same way that we would assess a dissertation or a master's thesis. And in particular, once you get to the PhD level, are you making an original contribution to the subject? That will be something that's being asked of you when you are writing for a humanities journal as well. And so it's really important, and I learned this early on in my publishing experiences, to set up front the what's at stake question. So within your introduction for a humanities journal article, you're going to offer maybe an anecdote that gets everybody like kind of setting the scene. Then you're going to offer your thesis and what you're aiming to do in this paper. And then you're going to kind of give the so what. What's at stake? Why this now? Why is this important? So that's you situating your argument within the field. And when you justify that early on and you don't bury that within an article, it's much easier for it to be accepted for publication. So again, as I said, the standard model is to have solo authored publications, perhaps co-authored publications with another scholar, but more than one other scholar is basically an exception to the rule. It's generally just 1 to 2 authors max. That's the standard, the norm. Merit here is given with your job CVs in humanities departments and your tenure academic progress files to these solo authored journal articles. It's showing that you can demonstrate that you can produce sustained and valuable arguments in your field and offer new insights that are accepted by, reviewers in that field. So the system does not favor those who work collaboratively, and it does not want and it doesn't favor people who cannot churn out large portions of writing quickly. I think that's a real flaw. It's an outdated model that needs to shift because it disproportionately affects those of us who maybe have other things that we have to take care of. So one of the things that we're hearing basically every day right now is that journal submissions by women are basically 0 since COVID has started. And that's because arguably women in households will take on domestic labor, whether it be childcare or caring for the elderly and kind of running a household. And so there's simply no time for research. And this is going to be a huge issue within the next 5 years that we're going to be fighting very hard for within the academy, to understand that we need to make some accommodations for that. This is not a time to be productive, and yet some people who don't have those requirements put upon them are going to be very productive, and that's going to be hard because it's going to split how much of a parity of publishing is happening, and we want to be careful about that. So hopefully things will be shifting. All right. So how do we generate publications? This is another question. I started my tenure track position at the University of Waterloo 1 month after I defended my dissertation. I had a 1-year-old and I had intense, and I still have pretty intense imposter syndrome. So for me, I needed to figure out how to generate publications as painlessly and as effortlessly as possible because my time was kind of constrained and it was very hard for me to write. This was not an easy thing for me to do. My dissertation took a very long time and I found it quite painful. I think that I don't know who's in the audience, but some of you are grad students, I'm guessing. And so things have changed a lot in the last 7 years. There's sort of this expectation that you're going to publish articles while you're writing your dissertation. I sincerely have no idea how you're supposed to do that. I think it's kind of awful, but it seems to be the thing that is being expected of you in the job market. And so my first piece of advice is get a postdoc if you can, because that will give you paid time to create a list of publications for you to go on the job market. That's my first piece of advice. But also, I'm also just offering sympathy and solidarity because I just find it's baffling to me. So how do we do this? The first thing you want to ask yourself is your dissertation. Is it a book or is it a series of articles? So this is a humanities specific question because the golden standard in the humanities for getting tenure is a book. With a reputable university publisher. I did not have a book when I went up for tenure, just to let you know. So it's possible to do it without that. So if it is a book, then that's a whole other conversation, and I'm happy to have that conversation another day. But if your dissertation is not coherent enough to become a book, which is perfectly fine, a lot of ours aren't, then you want to parcel it out into a series of articles. This is great, right? Because then you could be quickly generating existing work that you've already written into articles. So you could get you 5 or 6 publications. The other thing that you can ask yourself is, are there articles hidden in all of your discarded writing? Have you written 3 versions of chapter number 1 for your dissertation? Okay, let's look at the other 2 and see if there's an article in there. What about term papers you wrote at the beginning of your PhD or in your master's? What about your MRP thesis? Could those become articles? Anything you've ever written, hopefully you've saved it in a pile of, let's call it the discards or future articles pile. If you haven't done that, start doing that now. And every so often just go and look through it and say, yeah, there's an article there for sure. That means you might already have half of an article written, and that could be amazing. It also means that you've had some distance from it, and you might be able to really bring it to a new level of sophistication for the publishing world. The other piece of advice, and this is basically, I think, how I got tenure, is apply for every special issue of a journal that you see. So set yourself up on every listserv that is relevant to your field, look for the calls for papers, and apply. This is how I got probably my first 5 articles, was to apply for special issues. And I really think it's important. There's 2 things I want to say about this. One, it's okay if the thing hasn't been written yet. It can totally be speculative. just make up something that you want to write and commit to writing it. I think it's important that you really want to write that thing so that it gives you the motivation if you do get accepted. So yeah, it can be totally speculative. You just have to have knowledge of that area in the field, but you don't have to have written it yet. You just have to have an interest in it. The other thing is when you're writing an abstract for a call for papers, hone in on the wording and language from the call for papers and mimic it or really integrate it into your abstract. That way, when they're going through like 30 to 50 abstracts, yours stands out because it's like, oh yeah, this really fits the spirit of the journal issue. And so that's great. That's a great addition for us. So those are a couple of my little tips for how you can get into getting some things quickly published. If you aren't going that route and you're just going to kind of cold submit to a journal, you need to start with a couple of things. I just want to make sure that nobody's texting me. No, I just didn't know if Bree and them were saying wrap it up. So here's some more tips and tricks on process. Decide on the journal that you want to submit to. Research a bunch of journals, read articles from them, and make a list of your top 3 for each article that you want to submit. And start with your first. Make them a descending order of preference. Once you've done that, and like really look to the journals that really have a spirit and a mission that works for you, or the writing that's in it you really like, and it's like, yeah, I write like that, I can do that, I'm in the same kind of general area of expertise. You can contact the editor, pitch your article in 1 paragraph max, and ask if it seems like it would be a good fit, if they would like a submission. Only do that when you're really close to being ready to submit, and be like, great, I'll follow up within the next 2 weeks with a submission. Another thing you need to do, or I would suggest you do early on, and I actually learned this from Bree, so hat tip to Bree, format it properly from the beginning. Go to their website. It'll say instructions for authors. Get to know intimately what it is they want you to do and set up your article format from the get-go as you're writing. And my other thing that Bree taught me that I'm so thankful for is always have your reference list on the go in real time so that you're not doing it at the last minute, which is like the worst. It'll help like this whole process go along more smoothly. So format properly. Journals are either going to have you submit through some kind of online portal, or they're going to have you submit to an editor, and it depends on the journal and how much the journal is integrated into something like Sage or Taylor and Francis, which are large publishing kind of institutions which hold a bunch of journals, or if it's kind of a smaller run journal, like run out of an association, in which case you're probably just working in email with someone. So that will be different experiences. When you do it on an online portal, it often asks for a cover letter. So that's where you submit your pitch, where you say, dear editors, this is my article. This is why I think it's valuable. I hope you consider it. So that's kind of like almost like that other email that you might have sent to an editor if you were going to go directly through email. Other than that, I think that what happens after that? Okay, so you've submitted it. Congratulations. You're going to then wait. You're going to wait 3 to 6 months minimum before you send a follow-up email. Sometimes you can wait till 8. It's notoriously, this is a long moment and you may not hear from them. They haven't forgotten about you. They're probably just trying to find reviewers. If you're in a niche field, there's very few reviewers. They're trying to convince people to read it and to give the review that needs to happen for blind peer review. So that can take a very long time. If you haven't heard by 8 months, it is well within your rights, between 6 and 8 months, to send a follow-up email. And just say, hi, just checking in the status of my article. I have an article that I submitted in 2014. I email every year and a half and say, hi, what's going on? They're like, yeah, soon. So yeah. So some things, and if you're like, no, I'm done waiting, this is really important, I want to publish it, you just say, thanks so much, I'm going to put it elsewhere. And that's within your rights as well. Okay, so you then want to follow up. However, once you have heard, this is what you can expect to happen. You're either going to be given an accepted with major or minor revisions. So that's amazing. That's amazing. Congrats if that happens. You may get a revise and resubmit where they're like, yeah, this would be a really good fit for the journal, but it needs a ton of work. This is the most common, so never feel bad. Or you might get a rejection. Again, never feel bad. Even superstars get rejections from journals. This is just because someone is really well established doesn't mean that they're guaranteed to get published in journals. So rejection is equally as common as revise and resubmit or accepted with major or minor revisions. At that point, you just give yourself a hug and move on to the next journal on your list. That's all it is. The reasons why I don't think you need to take it personally with rejection is because there's a lot of gatekeeping, and it might just be that whoever's the editor at that moment at that journal really, really bristles at whatever your approach is to your scholarship. And that's fine. That's happened to me many times, and it was heartbreaking. But at the same time, it allowed me to really hone in on what matters to me and what I'm going to want to put out in the world, and really let me kind of settle into who I was as a scholar. Anyway, in this process, if you're like, I can't handle this idea of rejection or criticism, it's so scary. I agree with you, I completely understand. But what's really important is that reviewers, you're either gonna get reviewer number 1 or number 2, you're probably gonna get both. Reviewer number 1 is nice, is really nice and engaged and kind. Sometimes they're a bit absent, they're gonna be like, yeah, this is great, just fix some typos. Sometimes they're gonna be really thoughtful and give you pages of really helpful, constructive advice that makes your article 100 times better. Reviewer number 2 is going to either be petty, mean, angry, all of the above, ask for tons of revisions. Some of them are going to be totally useful, some of them are not. And you just take the good with the bad. You let the lead editor of the journal who is giving you the information guide you. If they're like, yes, take all of reviewer number 2's suggestions, this is really important, then you do that. If they're like, yeah, you can take some of what they say, we're not expecting you to do all of it, you know, then you pick and choose what works for you and your particular vision for the article. So that's, and you know, everybody gets reviewer number 1s and 2s, like everybody, and reviewer number 2 is awful. And I've been reviewer number 2, and I know I have, and I've felt terrible about it. So we can talk about the politics of that later if you'd like. So what are some revision best practices? To get a spreadsheet to set out your tasks. Rereading the reviewer comments over and over again in the form that you get them can be very hard and soul crushing and overwhelming. So the first thing is take a break before you even attempt to revise your article. Often journals will give you between 6 weeks and 3 months to do your revisions. So you have some time, so take at least a week off once you've read the reviewer comments, just to give yourself some breathing space. And then take it away from that what feels personal in the way that they're writing about the work, and set up a spreadsheet with tasks, and then just tick off the tasks and be like, I'm doing these 3 tasks today, and you sit down and you do that. I think it's really important that all of your correspondence with the editors, and the reviewers won't see your comments, but they will when you do a resubmit, because you're going to do a letter that breaks down what you've done and what you've taken in of their comments. Always be kind and professional, 100% all the time. Editing journals and being reviewers is a fairly thankless job, and it's a part of our service that we commit to as scholars, but it's adding to a lot of our work, and so the more kind and professional you can be, the smoother this whole situation is going to go. And then be timely. If they give you a 6 to 3 month window, you've got to fit within it, or else they might bump your article out of line for publishing in their journal. So that's really, really important. But you know, I think it's important when you're doing the revision process to really decide where you agree and disagree with reviewers, and not that you're going to send them an email back being like, I completely disagree with everything, how dare you, but you can be like, I see this comment and why it's valuable, but I was trying to go for this, so I'm going to try and re-articulate that more clearly. So there's ways to be really, really generative in the way that you engage with editors, and editors can oftentimes be amazing, and especially with early career scholars, they can be very kind, and really hopefully you have that experience that you've got some really great reviewers and editors who help you through some of those early experiences. If not, we're going to start a support group somehow through the Feminist Think Tank that helps you through this. Okay, so I've talked for a long time, so let's pop over to Q&As. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and me and Bree are going to pop on together and take your questions. So thank you. I'm gonna get over here. You're muted again, my friend.
Sorry,
and we all know what you said.
So
yeah,
loudly.
Okay.
It's fine. It's fine. Okay, I think we're going to pop over to Marisa really quickly, who's going to make a small announcement for us. And I'm not going to say the F word again.
Hi, yes, a small announcement, big announcement, but I won't take up too much of your time. There has been a little bit of a time mix-up in when this event was supposed to start, and it's completely my fault, only my fault. Everything about that mix-up is my fault. Anyway, thank you for joining us, and not to worry, because everything is recorded, and we see that a lot of you were able to pop in. You'll be able to go back and watch the beginning, no problem. And now that we start the Q&A, hopefully most of you are caught up. If not, feel free to fire some questions over to me. And yeah, thank you for your patience. Back to you, Bree.
And now I am not muted. Okay, so we've got some really good questions that have come in. And I'm going to just start with the first one that came in because it's really topical, both in terms of the content of the question and topical in terms of this global pandemic. So the first question we've got is it difficult planning to write articles so far in advance? How do you mediate this when writing about topical subjects such as COVID?
Yeah, this is excellent. I am live. Okay, sweet. Okay. Are me and Bree sharing the screen, or are we going to pop back and forth? Just a quick question. It looks like we're going to pop back. Okay.
Yeah, back and forth.
Yeah, this is a great question. So I have two answers to this. At the moment, there are a ton of calls going out on my listservs for COVID special issues. So if you have time right now and you are in a place where you can write, I recommend that if you want to write on something like COVID, jump in on those special issues, apply, because this is going to be a way to get publications, and it's going to be a way to make sure they're timely because people are going to be pushing out their special issues on COVID really fast. So for instance, I saw a call for leisure studies for a COVID issue on like COVID in the time of leisure, and I jumped on it right away. It was only a 3,000 word essay, which was great because I could write it fairly quickly. And it's being published, like I wrote it maybe at the end of April, and it's being published in a week. And so with topical things that are happening in real time where you're seeing a ton of calls, get in on those calls. That's my first answer, is that when you see a call for papers in a moment of a real-time event, go for it. The other thing that I would suggest is that say something really pops up to you and you want to write about it and you want to get it as soon as possible. So for instance, Bree and I, after a very long 2-year journey, are finally publishing an article on Me Too that we started in 2018. And so it would have been great had it been published at the end of 2018. Here we are in 2020. We're 3 years after Me Too. How do we feel about that? Okay, so when you are writing about things, and it is not a special issue that is going to be done really fast, you need to both be really okay with the fact that what you're saying is going to come in hindsight, and that it's not going to be the first hot take, which is also completely okay. You want to be collecting whatever is coming out about the topic you are studying in real time and have that as your set of resources and research. So if you're seeing think pieces and scholars writing for the Washington Post or the Guardian, collect all of that as your research. That's your real-time research that you're going to be responding to, and know that yours will come out as kind of a reflection based on whatever's happening at that moment. The other thing you can do, and I'm thinking about this with the book I'm writing right now, is I'm writing about the time period from 2010 to 2020. The book probably won't get published for another 5 years. I have to write it almost as a historical reflection. I have to build that into the way that I'm talking about this and not try and like state something about the present, but state something about the recent past, if that helps to answer that. Bree, do you want to add anything?
I think this question is really difficult for me because my dissertation is also on Me Too, and I'm now shifting it to think about, like Shannon, what you were saying, how do I make it more of a historical overview while still commenting on the relevancy and the urgency of the problem? So the one thing to say, I think, is just to comment on the fact that, hey, I'm mentioning that this did happen in the past. We're taking it up now, which maybe is 3 or 4 years later, but finding ways to articulate the urgency and why we still need to talk about this particular issue.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly it. Like, you situate it within its context, and then you note that, like, just because its peak moment of virality, say, passed, doesn't mean that its impact or effects on the world have passed. And so that's where you're going to situate your focus, as opposed to maybe narrating in real time. You're looking at, like, what impact has it had? That's where you're doing that analysis and meaning making.
Great, thanks.
No problem.
I was just waiting for the live to shift back. Okay, let's move on to the next question. There's a lot of really great ones. Let's go to this one next. It's commenting on dissertation and publishing out of the dissertation. So this one is from Leonard. It says, You mentioned that publishing the dissertation first is a good strategy in the humanities. This is quite interesting because this would be such a different strategy in other fields like HCI, where it's often imperative to publish during the thesis writing and then use the articles as a foundation for the thesis. How much is it frowned upon in the humanities when you are using co-authored and pre-published work as the foundation for your thesis? This question really resonates with me because Shana and I do a lot of publishing together, and we have become what we call this mind meld, where we have ideas that become really similar, but also we'll be thinking about these two things in different places. So I'm in Toronto, Shana's in Waterloo, and we'll both be thinking about things together. And when we meet, we'll both have like a really similar idea. And we're like, we don't know if this comes from the fact that we've been talking about these things together, or if because we are just like on the same wavelength. But where it becomes difficult for me is that I'm finishing up my dissertation, and because we publish so much together, I can't use most of that work. I have to figure out a way to actually make something original. Like, wait, what's my original contribution? And it's sad because I also don't like this solo author model, because I think that feminist work is best in collaboration. So this whole time we've been having this tension with myself and like the academic world, which sounds very dramatic, but this tension of, okay, what do I do that I think is feminist, or how do I actually move forward in an academic setting that's going to be setting me up for some sort of future success? All that to say, I don't have much experience actually being able to speak to that because the dissertation is not done yet. So maybe, Shana, I'll pass it on to you after I've given some context as to where we're coming from, and you can try and round out the question.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to echo what Bree said. It's absolutely frowned upon that anything in the dissertation would be co-authored, a part of an existing publication. It has to be entirely uniquely created original work that makes an original contribution to the field. That's how it's going to be assessed by all of the examiners. And so, yeah, this is, again, the case study of me and Bree is really good because I'm not on her committee. And I was going to read some of her chapters to give her some feedback. And then I realized that it's so close to the book I'm writing that I can't read it because I'm really afraid that I'm going to somehow osmosisly take Bree's ideas into my work. And I think this is a reality with when you have exceptional grad students in your life. There are professors who will take that work and take, what's the word? I'm blanking on words right now. We'll take credit for it. And so, yeah, ownership for it, which is absolutely horrifying. And so, yeah, it's completely different. Your publications cannot overlap with your dissertation, and nor can anything be co-authored that's going to come into your dissertation. So it looks like it's like a 180 from that.
Can you also talk a bit about authorship in the humanities? Is it frowned upon to have more than a single author?
Yeah, so I mentioned that a little bit in the talk. The gold standard is solo authored publications that are 10,000 words in top tier journals. So you must generate the equivalent of a chapter that is accepted by a top tier journal. Again, most of them have 20% or less acceptance, so they're really hard to achieve. But in the humanities, it is largely looked upon as suspicious if there's more than one author. And if it's more than two, I don't know how seriously it gets taken, to be honest. And the reason for this is because the process of creating a humanities article is a very internally generated analytic process, right? You are already, as a scholar in the humanities, engaging in a dialogue with all existing scholarship that you choose to bring in. So it doesn't make sense. Like, how would you and the other person break this down? You know, like it's such an uncommon thing that people wouldn't even know how to like attribute how much you did within it. So if I'm applying for a SSHRC grant, I have to say, oh, I was 60% of the article was written by me, 40% was written by me. I have to break down the percentages so that there's clarity on who is writing. I think this is super flawed. I think this is a huge problem, and it's a type of gatekeeping that keeps a lot of people out of publishing. And I think that's why we don't have parity in the publishing world. So I think it's a problem, but it's also the standard.
All right, so I want to ask a lot of questions about like how we break down that standard, but that is not the point of this right now. So let's go to an actual question from other folks. Here's, I think, another important one. What's the value in publishing in middle state publications versus a formal academic journal?
Okay, that's a great question. I'm going to wait. Okay, thank you. So middle state publications are fairly new in to a humanities audience. I think they're amazing. I'm super excited about them. I think they're a great idea. I think that they would not have been valued in the same way for me for my tenure package or maybe on the job market. Although remember, I did get hired with very few publications, so we can talk a little bit about what that looked like as well, although it was 7 years ago. I think that things will change. I think that when people like me and people similar to me in the academy who have kind of commitments to ethics and justice in the academy, when we become editors and we become tenure reviewers and we go on hiring committees, we're going to argue for and change that. And so I think middle state publications are amazing. And the reason why I think so is because they are quicker in terms of timeliness. The gatekeeping has different commitments and they're publicly oriented. And I think that's where scholarship has to go. And so my opinion is I love them. Do them. They're amazing. They also allow you to practice your writing and get really comfortable with the experience of publishing. And so at the moment, I don't see them in the humanities as having equal weight to an academic journal at all. It has to be double-blind, peer-reviewed, or it doesn't really get that much traction. But we are going to change that. I'm going to change that. No, I don't know how. Yeah. Okay. Anyways, go on.
Shannon finished that by saying, I don't know how I'm going to change it, but we are. And I'm right there with you. We'll do our best. Okay, so here's another important question. All of these are important. I preface every question by saying that. All right, so what is your take on interdisciplinary researchers wanting to tackle publications in both humanities and sciences together? This is speaking straight to us. Oops. Can you give people tips in regard to their publication strategies so they don't alienate other disciplines in the process? Is this even possible for non-tenured researchers? What is your take on this?
Yeah, what an amazing question. It is close to my heart. Okay, again, 2 answers. One, I think it's imperative and vital that we have conversations across disciplines, especially when we center on a similar topic. So say we all care about HCI, yet our frameworks for coming at studying it are like night and day. They're so different, right? I think it's important for us to have those conversations and figure out how we can come to an understanding of knowledge and share that in an academic public venue like a publication. I think that's absolutely vital. I also think it's really, really intensely difficult. So is it good for you to do before you're in a tenure track position? In some ways, yeah, because when you go on the job market, you can be like, yeah, look at me. I'm in this radically interdisciplinary space where I can translate knowledge across fields and disciplines. That's a huge contribution to knowledge. So if you can do it and it comes easily to you, absolutely. If you find that it is so difficult to even get the writing out there, don't put that kind of pressure on yourself. Also, you are going to have to find journals that are willing to publish that kind of experimental work because it's going to be pretty out of the status quo. So you'd have to do a deep dive into what kind of journals are doing radically interdisciplinary work. That would be my first suggestion. You have to find a good working partner, 1 or 2, and you have to find a really good working strategy to create that knowledge, because the translation that I see that we have to do across disciplines is enormous. I also think it's really, really productive for shaping your understanding of the world. So I've learned a lot and become less of an ass by getting to know social science scholars. I was such a snobby humanities person, like, well, of course, personal interpretation is the best, blah, 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 Foucault, Derrida. And kind of learning from my social science scholar friends, like, oh my gosh, you're so snobby and what the heck, that it's made my scholarship a lot better. And it's made my writing a lot better, because I've begun to try and follow a little bit of a social science model with writing, and it makes things a lot clearer. So as much as you can, put yourself in those incredibly uncomfortable positions with people you trust. Try and get the writing out there if you can, and don't be discouraged if you're not getting published right away, because some people are just going to outright reject it because it's going to go against all the norms. But I think it's an excellent intellectual exercise. Just don't just have other things on the go, because I think it'll be hard to publish that.
Shana, as a follow-up, I'm wondering if you have advice for seeking out those kinds of partnerships? Because I think it becomes really easy to stay within your own groups of people and to constantly be seeking advice and feedback from those same kinds of people. Do you know about any outlets or any groups on campus even that help you facilitate that kind of feedback, or that put you in conversation with people outside of your field who will make you feel welcome and not like attacked?
Yeah, I think the GI is a great starting place for this kind of thing. I think it's a really good example where you're bringing together people from different disciplines who have a shared common set of interests and knowledges. So for me, that's a really great working model of it. And the more the GI that we can encourage and ensure that we are speaking across paradigms, the better. I think ideally the feminist think tank, what we want from it is to have everybody coming in who is not just necessarily an arts or humanity-based scholar, but people from everywhere. Beyond that, I don't actually know. I think that for me, it was always just accidental. Like I made friends with someone at like a orientation when I started here and was like, oh, you happen to be in leisure sciences. I don't know what that is. Hence a kind of collaborative thing. So it may be accidental. I don't know of formal mechanisms for that, but maybe there's a need for that people could start like graduate student alliances that deal with like going across disciplines based on a specific subject. I'm sure within professional associations, there would also be some kinds of interests in that as well. So if you're really tied in as a grad rep to like, I don't know, what the equivalent would be like for me at Society of Cinema and Media Studies, whatever your equivalents to that are, maybe you're really active within those grad populations and you can seek that kind of stuff.
Great, thanks for that. We've got one more question here. Is there a formalized structure to humanities articles ever? For some context, I'm comparing this to the science model where intro-related work methods results discussion is basically the standard and required format structure of most articles. Is there an equivalent of that for the humanities?
There is. Thanks for asking. Yes, absolutely. I'm going to share screen again because I pulled one of my favorite articles to show you. So I'm going to open it first and then, oh no. Sorry, give me one sec. I'm going to share my screen first. Yep, perfect. Okay, so earlier I was telling you, find your favorite, find an article you love and mimic it. Like whatever article you find in the humanities that you think, oh man, this is so powerful, I love this, just follow the structure. Because it's not as hard and fast a rule, but at the same time, there is a general flow. So this is one of my favorite articles from 1991 by Linda Williams. It is so influential within the field of film studies, it can't be overstated. So if we look at the article, she gives an opening anecdote. And the anecdote is about her and her 7-year-old son going to the movies. And it's directly relevant to the thesis she's about to make, which again was a mind-blowing thesis, within film studies in 1991. And within that, she is offering an introduction that sets the scene. So there's something very aesthetic or structural about the way that humanities articles exist. They sort of, it's like telling a story in some ways. This isn't always the case, but this is sometimes the case. So she's sort of setting the scene through here. And then she's going to give you her thesis. So in that introduction, there's going to be some kind of anecdote, setting of a scene. There's going to be a thesis. So what she is aiming to argue in the essay. And then there's going to be a what's at stake. So if you notice here, I think I can highlight it if you can see this. My hope, therefore, is that by thinking comparatively about these gross genres, we might be able to do X. So that's her telling you the what's at stake, what I want. I'm guiding you as a reader to the thing that I'm trying to do. So that would be kind of the same as what you would call an intro. It's comparable to an intro. Then what happens is what we would call a theoretical lit review. So now she's going to be like, here are my key terms. My key terms are genre, melodrama, porn, and horror are the things she's talking about. I'm going to go through what other people have said about them. So what is the field saying? That's kind of what we would call the lit review. And I think in some ways this often is the same as what in other fields would be the method. So method is a very confusing thing for most humanities scholars because our method is to read things closely. So we don't have to describe what our method is because everybody knows that we're all doing the same thing. So instead we do what's called the kind of theoretical overview. And we're like, what has everybody else said about my key concepts? What are they saying? Why are their things interesting? Where have they gotten it wrong? How am I intervening into this? That would take the place of your method section, and it would be your theoretical overview. After that, in a humanities article, especially one that deals with texts, you would then go into close readings of your case studies. So you might, for example, in this article, she's looking at 3 different types of genres and how they situate women's bodies. So she's going to do a close reading of an example from melodrama. And in that, she will explain the text within its historical context, and then she will be like, look at these 3 examples in the film of where the women's bodies are situated to prove my argument. Then she will move on to the next case study, which would be in porn or in horror, and she would do the exact same type of close reading, where she'd be like, and in this example from this genre, this is how bodies are situated. Okay, so the bulk of the article is going to be this close reading where she's taking pains to show you her argument via examples. After all of that is done, and that's what we would call the analysis, hers is kind of different because she actually gives a table that very rarely happens, but it's incredibly useful because her argument is very nuanced and complex. And then the conclusion then will ultimately be like, well, from what I've described in my analysis, these are the things that we now need to think about going forward when we talk about genres and women's bodies. So that for me is an example of how it breaks down. I'm going to go back to my live screen now. So it's intro with some kind of anecdote. It's going to be theoretical overview where you situate yourself in the existing discourse, long section of close analysis of case studies, and then a conclusion that shows you where we want to take this going forward. So in some ways it mirrors, and in some ways it really diverges from a different model in different fields.
It sounds to me that what you just outlined and the outline that Leonard also offered are actually quite similar, but we interpret what each of those terms or headings means quite differently. And that's actually where Shana and I have had some trouble in trying to publish in social science journals because we have such a humanities take. And so we are interpreting methods as close reading, like Shana mentions, and the reviewers are like, where's your method? This is not a method. And so we have to do a lot of our own research to say, okay, how do we translate what it is that we're doing into the other field that has so much of its own history and its own research already done? There is one last question, and maybe we can try and answer it as quickly as possible and then pass it back over to Marisa for some closing remarks. This question is, how do you respond to a scientist who says, but you don't use the scientific method in humanities? I'm interpreting that as how to justify your work in a way. Like, what do you say to people who are kind of coming after you and the things that you are doing?
Yeah.
I don't have a better way to say that.
You take a deep breath. I don't know because this is tough. It's tough because in that question, which does happen often, there is an assumption that one approach to knowledge is superior to the other. And the assumption, and I know anonymous, whoever's asking this question, it's not you who's making that assumption. But in my experiences, I've been in rooms where the humanities have been discredited because they're not following specifically hard science methods, right? And I think what's most scary to someone coming from outside the humanities is, but all you're relying on is your own objective set of knowledge and principles. And it's like, yeah, of course. And so I think my answer is, yeah, of course, that's what we do. That's what we've been doing since, ancient Greece. But okay, so I can be a bit snarky in these moments. I think the point is that it's really, really important that we sort of just establish, well, that's one paradigm of knowledge, but there are many paradigms of knowledge. And there are enough biases within scientific knowledge that we can open ourselves up to other approaches. And so the humanities are offering something very different. Nobody in the humanities is offering hard facts. Nobody's ever saying that's all it's analysis and interpretation. All we're doing is analyzing, interpreting, and offering forward to a new dialogue what we think based on our interpretation and our own particular perspective. And so that's one calm answer. My other answer is, have you never read Foucault? that's usually what I want to throw at them. Then I go to, I don't believe in Descartes. And so I can go in a lot of different directions here, and none of them are useful. But I think if you just say, look, there's different knowledge paradigms, and ours is offering interpretation analysis, and that does not have to require some kind of formal set of experimental, approaches to gathering data. The data is very different within the humanities, and yeah, we get to put forward our own positions and create new knowledges. I don't know. That's what I would do. I won't go into my snarky zones, but yeah, that's such a great question.
I think we can also recommend the book Data Feminism.
Yes.
Can you say that out loud because I'm not online? No, I'm online. Never mind. So what I was going to add was that we would recommend the book Data Feminism to anyone also who's wondering this question, because it outlines some really important ways that the more transparent we can become and the more perspectives we can pull in, whether those are hard science or humanities or social sciences, the more of that we can pull in, the more objective we can actually be, because we're being transparent about where all of our different knowledges and biases are coming from. So the scientific method can also be open to bias. And so Data Feminism, that book is really important for saying, hey, here's how we can kind of outline those things. So now, thank you everyone for joining us. I will pass it to Marisa to close us off. Muted.
Okay, yeah, that's easier to mistake than you think. Okay, thank you everybody, and thank you Shana and Bree for delivering that. Shana, thank you so much for your thoughts. Bree, thank you for your additional thoughts. It's amazing. My brain is spinning a little bit because we just had a wonderful hour packed full of insights. I want to say an additional thank you to Megan, who has been our person behind the scenes running this whole show, making sure it happens, clicking the live button and transitioning between us at our whims. It's amazing. Thank you, Megan. Okay, and also closing remarks, I had to say that, right, okay, thank you again for your patience with the time zone mix up, whatever we want to call it. Again, this will go up on our YouTube, so you can watch it from the beginning, and I believe that's actually a silver lining of this being an online format, because that's much easier for us to do. We can get that to you much sooner, so hopefully your inconvenience will be limited because of that. As well, if you didn't get to make it to the Q&A, or if you still have some questions you're chewing over, I encourage you to reach out to either me, Bree, or Shana to inquire about when we're meeting for feminist think tanks. They typically happen on Friday afternoons, although I'm going to avoid giving you an exact time just in case I get it wrong. But yes, please reach out to us because we are there and we love to chat with you. Bree is holding up her finger that it's 1 o'clock. So
yeah, Shana, am I right? I'm at 1 o'clock.
All right. So yes, we have those meetings via Slack. So reach out to us and we can pull you into the Slack and we can talk further. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope that you stay safe, healthy, as happy as possible. And please, again, I've said it like 14 times, but don't hesitate to reach out to us. We are here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.